WLRN edition 113 in 3, 2, 1.
I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Sisters, rise again. I was born woman, off my knees I will stand for my liberation. Rise and rise again.
Greetings and welcome to the 113th edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, September 4th, 2025. This is Thistle, anti-nukes feminist and resident WLRN singer-songwriter. This month's edition focuses on the 80th anniversary of the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and where we are currently with the nuclear threat and the peace movement. We'll hear an interview I did with Cynthia Enloe, a research professor at Clark University in the Department of Social Justice and Sustainability. Cynthia offers a global perspective with an analysis of how different governments handle things differently, as do women in the peace movement. She highlights the work of ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which I will link to in our podcast description for listeners to learn more. Stay tuned till the very end for riveting commentary from Aurora Linnea about the state of our world in terms of all things nuclear and what this 80th anniversary signifies for us now. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's Cat Bradfield with women's news from around the globe for this Thursday, September 4th, 2025. Take it away, Cat.
Thanks, Thistle. In March 2025, the UK lesbian collective L Community applied to Southwark Council to convert a disused railway arch into the UK's first female-only lesbian community venue. This application was rejected, and L Community are now challenging the rejection following the precedent set by the For Women Scotland case, confirming that women are entitled to sex-based protections under UK law. The case is going to a judicial review, where a court forces a public body to explain and legally justify its decision. L Community are currently accepting donations to cover the legal fees of their fight for the right to lesbian-only spaces. More information can be found on their website, www.thelcommunity.com. On August 15th, around 120 feminists gathered outside Parliament House in Melbourne, Australia, for a rally organised by Women's Voices Australia, titled Women Will Speak. The rally was met with a counter-protest by trans rights activists, 4 of whom were arrested after clashing with police engaged to protect the rally attendees, after violence from counter-protesters at a previous Women Will Speak rally in April this year. For the first time, a woman has been granted refugee status after fleeing her country due to persecution for opposing gender ideology. Brazilian feminist Isabella Sepa is the first person to be recognised as a victim of state persecution on account of holding gender-critical views. Sepa was arrested in 2022 for referring to trans-identified male politician Erica Hilton as a man on social media. Hilton reported Sepa's post to the police, resulting in a criminal investigation and the possibility of a 25-year prison sentence. Brazilian law currently recognises discrimination against the, quote, LGBTQ community, end quote, as a form of social racism. In July 2024, Sepa travelled to Spain to visit a friend. Her passport was flagged to authorities who advised her that her situation may constitute political persecution and it would be unsafe for her to return to Brazil. In June 2025, she applied for formal refugee status, which has now been granted with the assistance of the European Union Agency for Asylum. She is the first Brazilian citizen to receive this designation of state persecution since 1985, and this case will set a precedent for other women around the world facing persecution for speaking out against gender ideology. The Prime Minister of Denmark has for the first time apologised for the historic forced contraception of Greenlandic women and girls. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen described the practice as systemic discrimination, acknowledging it caused both physical and psychological harm. From 1966 to 1992, over 4,500 women and girls were fitted with IUDs by Danish doctors without their consent in an attempt to reduce the population of Greenland. The apology comes ahead of the publication of an investigation into the IUD scandal, expected to be published in September. On August 25th, a women's golf tournament in British Columbia, Canada, was won by a trans-identified male. Veronica Ivy, a biological male, won the tournament despite only taking up competitive golfing earlier this year. The Olympic View Golf Club, who hosted the intra-club tournament, usually posts on social media celebrating the winners of their competitions. However, no such post has been made by the club regarding this particular event. On August 22nd, the President of Colombia appointed a trans-identified male as the country's Vice Minister for Women. President Gustavo Petro appointed Charlotte Schneider Callejas, a biological male, to the role in Colombia's Ministry of Equality and Equity. The Colombian government also drew public criticism earlier in the month for naming a male former pornography actor as its Minister for Equality. There has been recent controversy in Germany over whether to house a trans-identified male far-right extremist in a male or female prison. Marla Svenja Liebig, formerly known as Sven Liebig, was sentenced in July 2023 to 18 months in prison for extreme right incitement to hatred. Liebig was previously a member of the neo-Nazi group Blood and Honor and became legally recognised as female in late 2024 when Germany's self-ID laws came into effect. German media are questioning whether the new identity is serious, with newspaper Der Spiegel claiming that Liebig, quote, made the change of civil status in an abusive manner in order to provoke and embarrass the state, end quote. Despite this, the chief public prosecutor has confirmed that Liebig will serve his sentence at the Chemnitz women's prison. A number of female Italian politicians have submitted complaints after altered versions of their personal photos appeared on a pornography site. This has revived debate in Italy over ongoing misogyny. Politicians from both left and right were targeted, and several members of the centre-left Democratic Party submitted a formal complaint which has now prompted a police investigation. Democratic politician Valeria Campagna, one of the first to make an official complaint, wrote, "I can't stay silent because this story isn't just about me. It's about all of us. It's about our right to be free, respected, and to live without fear." The Italian press describes the incident as, quote, Italy's Me Too, end quote, and a petition calling for the site to be taken down has gained over 150,000 signatures. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have issued an order targeting the underground beauty salons set up by Afghan women after all salons were officially shut down in 2023. The underground salons have provided a financial and social lifeline for women under Taliban rule who are banned from most forms of paid employment and are not permitted to speak in public. The new order requires community leaders and elders to identify the salons and report them to the Vice and Virtue Police. The UK's Anti-Slavery Commissioner has launched an investigation into online prostitution sites due to concerns about the prevalence of exploitation and trafficking of vulnerable women on these platforms. Commissioner Eleanor Lyons will interview women who say they have been trafficked and advertised on these platforms, following a 2021 Scottish study on commercial sexual exploitation. On August 14th, Time magazine released its inaugural Girls of the Year list, celebrating the achievements of girls from around the world aged 12 to 17. The list, featuring 10 girls making a difference in fields of science, sport, advocacy and the arts, seeks to celebrate girls who challenge stereotypes, tackle problems head-on, and seek to build solutions from the ground up. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for this Thursday, September 4th. I'm Cat Bradfield. Share your news stories, announcements, and tips with us by emailing info@wlrnmedia.com and letting us know what's going on.
This is Joe Bro, and you are listening to WLRN.
electrons echoing off the solar system like a hawk in the hills at dawn. The smallest unit of matter, uniting bird and rock and tree and you and me. Oh, holy is the atom, the truly intelligent design to which all of evolution is graciously aligned. The one single structure to which everything distills, the air, the wood smoke there, and the hills. Oh, leave me here surrounded by everything that's real, far outside the boundaries of digitized ordeal. Yeah, leave me here awake, leave me here to heal. Human beings are a cross between monkeys and ants. You can see us from your spaceship, melting the polar ice caps with our arrogance. Summoned a congress of angels dressed in riot gear. We got ourselves a serious situation down here. I have this great great uncle who worked on the atomic bomb. He got a Nobel Prize in physics and a place in this song. And I bet there were no windows and no women in the room when they applied themselves to the pure science of yeah, messing with the atom is the highest form of blasphemy. Whether you are making weapons or simply electricity, someone fashioned me a puppet. I have been called to engage with the maniacal heretics of the nuclear age. Let the religious get religion. Let consumers get a clue. Let scientists get perspective. Let activists get their due. Let industry get a conscience. Let the earth inherit the meek. Let the divinity of nature speak. Oh, the glory of the atom begs a reverent word. The primary design of the whole universe. Yes, let us sing its praises. Let us bow our heads in prayer at the magnificent consciousness incarnate there.
That was Ani DiFranco with her song Atom. Next up, we'll hear excerpts of an interview Thistle did with Cynthia Enloe, research professor at Clark University. They discuss the enormity of the nuclear problem and why it's important to have a global perspective as we tackle it. Take a listen.
So welcome, Cynthia. Can you introduce yourself, please? to
Yeah,
our
sure, Thistle. First of all, it's nice to be talking to you again. That's lovely. Yes, my name's Cynthia Enloe. I'm a research professor. That's what's on the letterhead at Clark University in central Massachusetts. I work in the areas of political science, well, politics, political life. What is political life in any country? And how it dovetails with women's studies, feminist analysis, and global affairs. That busy crossroads, that's what I'm standing in the middle of it.
Okay, fantastic. So and you've authored many books and worked with many other professors and scholars throughout your career to understand war. What is the significance of this 80th anniversary for us, considering the current nuclear threat?
Well, I think anniversaries, well, first of all, we miss a lot of anniversaries. I mean, most of us live our daily lives and we don't really think, well, what happened 50 years ago today? Or what happened 100 years ago? We don't. And so anniversaries, when they are noted, when we stop and we pause and we think, well, what happened, 80 years ago? And who developed this horrible, horrible weapon? There are many horrible weapons, by the way. And this is a particularly horrible weapon. Why did Americans, not all Americans, mind you, most of them didn't even know it was being developed. Why did Americans who were directing World War II develop such a horrible weapon? Who was it who developed it, since it was mainly civilians who developed it, for military uses under the presidents of the time, both FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and then Truman, who was the president when the bomb was directed to be dropped, and why on the Japanese, and why on these two cities, very densely populated, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Why then? Why those people? How have they interpreted it? It's an 80th anniversary. It's not just an 80th anniversary for Americans. It's an 80th anniversary for people throughout Asia, but particularly Japan. And so we have to think, well, what about Japanese feminists now? What do they think of this anniversary? And it's very important for them. Japanese, I've spent some time in Japan. I'm very lucky, and have worked with Japanese feminists. So I'm very conscious that this is not an anniversary that is, quote, an American anniversary. It's an anniversary for people throughout the Pacific, but also an anniversary for people in other countries whose governments have decided. I really like to underscore, decisions were made. Nothing is automatic. Nothing is natural. Feminists know that. Never say anything is natural. What do Russian feminists think of today? What do French feminists think today? What do Chinese feminists think today? What do North Korean feminists think? And so that's why the anniversary is a time to pause, to think, and to listen to feminists in other countries.
Were you going to say that Japan made the decision to never have nuclear weapons?
Well, that is part of the Japanese consciousness. The Japanese, now this, you never talk about whole people. I mean, there's a fierce debate in Japan about whether they should rearm now. Well, they already do have quite a large military, but it's called a defense force. And so in Japan now, if we are really thoughtful Americans of any stripe, we should be listening hard to the debate. It's going on amongst Japanese about whether, under the pressure from the U.S., that means under pressure from the U.S. government. And if we don't agree with that pressure, we should speak out. The pressure from the U.S. government, and it's not just Republicans, it's also Democrats, to have Japan more militarized today than it has been. And American governments, since the U.S. war in Korea, have pressured the Japanese public as well as Japanese officials to rearm, because once the U.S. government thought the Japanese government was their, quote, ally in the Cold War, now post-Cold War, the Japanese have been under pressure from the Americans, who have a lot of leverage over Japan, to build up their military, to have a more active military, to have a military that was more globally engaged. And what's amazing, the Japanese have resisted that pressure. Now we don't notice when other people resist the pressures to rearm, resist the pressures to make the military more on their side. But that's what the Japanese have been doing. That's what Japanese feminists have been doing.
They've been resisting. They've been resisting, but yet even within Japanese society, there is a fierce debate. Some Japanese believe they should arm themselves with nuclear weapons. Is that correct?
Not just with nuclear weapons, with a stronger military.
A stronger military in general, which
by the way, there's no, I'm sorry, Thistle, I don't know of any pressure within Japanese society to develop a nuclear weapon. No. That's not what I mean. I mean, the pressure from the U.S. government is to rearm, to have a strong military.
Right. Okay. But within Japanese society, there is resistance to that. And and I mean, that makes sense to me. But I also this brings me to a question about the theory of deterrence. What do you think of that idea that if everybody has, more and more weapons, bigger and bigger militaries, then that's going to prevent us, because it'll just mean mutual annihilation. And so that's a good thing for us to build up our military.
Well, it's a very particular mindset. It's not a mindset that most Americans have ever even engaged in. It's a very technical, specialized, mostly men, but not all men, who are the technicians who think like this. And it is a particular way of thinking. If I'm a bully on the block, I will keep peace on the block.
Well, you say
that is not how feminists think about peace.
You say that Americans haven't really engaged with the theory of deterrence, but I learned it in social studies class in high school, and that was in the 1980s. And as you may remember, that was a time when we very much felt like nuclear holocaust was going to happen, because of the tension between the Soviet Union and the US. And wow, that was quite a time to be a child, and yeah, I learned about deterrence. That's how the adults, I remember thinking that's how the adults are explaining this to me, this situation.
And a lot of people thought it was, quote, logical.
Right.
But most people in the US and most people in most countries whose governments have nuclear weapons. So you have to name which those countries are. That's India, Pakistan, China, France, Britain, Russia, the United States. And that most people in those countries have not thought really, they're not invited to think very deeply about what it means to have such a horrific weapon at their disposal, but also who controls it. They're very different kinds of governments. They're very, the British way of governing is not the same as the French, and the French isn't the same as the Chinese, and the Chinese isn't the same as the Indian or the Pakistani or the Americans. So they're very different, and feminists play different roles. Let's bring it back. Feminists who think about peace and think about peacekeeping and think about creating a peaceful world play very different roles in India than they do in France and in the United States compared to Russia under the Soviet Union or Russia now under Putin. So when we try and think about women in general and women who think of themselves as doing feminist work, They're not the same in those countries, and we have to be more curious about what they are and who they are, and are we in conversation with any of them? You can't do any of this alone. This has to be American feminists talking to Pakistani feminists, which they do, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What are some of those differences that are significant in the fight against nuclear holocaust? The differences between the governments that are governing these nuclear weapons?
well, one of the main differences to keep track of, and you have to keep track, yesterday isn't the same as today, and today isn't the same as tomorrow. So you can't have a short attention span, right? So, for instance, in the U.S., supposedly the executive, that means usually the president, is the one with the most authority over nuclear power. But the elected members of the House and the Senate, and they're not the same, have a lot of leverage if they want to exert it. That's why today the Republicans who have the majority over the House and over the Senate, both, are being so deferential to President Trump that they really have rolled back their responsibilities to investigate, to fund or not fund, to scrutinize and keep track of. It really depends. And that's true in India today, where Modi is the head of government, and he's more like Trump in this way. He has a very broad definition of his executive authority, and that really limits Indian feminists, although Indian feminists are very active. In France, there's a presidential system, but with a very strong legislature. In Britain, there's no president. In Britain, the executive is inside the legislature. So the legislators, who are called MPs, members of parliament, they're very much more subject to if women's or peace activists or feminists pressure. And that really makes a difference. In North Korea, there's not an organized feminist movement, nor is there in China, because the Chinese government under Xi Jinping is very authoritarian and is afraid of any popular movement, including a feminist movement. So there are Chinese feminists. We should never for a moment think there aren't Chinese feminists. There are Russian feminists. But in both those governments in 2025, it is very hard for them to organize, to be visible, and certainly to take on military questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think that that's a really valuable perspective as we talk about how do we stop the nuclear proliferation and the threat of a nuclear holocaust. And I have a particular question about that. I mean, men, and I know it's not all men, but it was all men, it was all males who developed the nuclear bomb. Like this 80th anniversary emotionally just really hit me. I listened to a couple of radio programs about the nuclear threat today being even worse than it was when I was growing up in the 80s. And it's like, why aren't people talking about it? Why is it only on this 80th anniversary that we mention it in the news for a moment? And then this is so important. If it's true that we're under even more of a threat than we were before, it's like, I don't know how my psyche can deal with that. And so my question is, the men created this problem. Can they solve it? Like male peace activists, can they solve it? Because I have the very hard time facing this. And I'm one of the privileged feminists in the United States, living with a roof over my head and, able to pay my bills and all of that. It's so unbearable.
Well, I mean, there's so much pain in the world, and we do have to we have to find ways, all of us have to find ways not to be paralyzed by it. or not to be cynical about it, like it's all a boys' show and what do we have to do with it? I'm really opposed to cynicism. I'm really opposed to passivity, that is withdrawal. All right? You have to do what you can do. And one of the great accomplishments of the last 20 years has been the international campaign led by feminists around the world called ICAN. ICAN, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. ICAN. ICAN. And if your listeners want, go online and look up ICAN.
We'll link to it, definitely.
Yes, well, what's really important about that, Thistle, I think, and I learned so much from them. So that is particularly led by indigenous feminists. That is, indigenous women activists in Australia, in the South Pacific, and in the U.S., where so many of the nuclear tests were held. And what's different is the activists in ICAN, they won the Nobel Peace Prize about 5 years ago, for their international successful work in getting a majority of governments now, to agree to the banning of nuclear weapons. That's now the international law. It's an international treaty. It got enough governments to agree to sign the treaty. Treaties have to be signed, and they have to be signed by governments. And in the U.S., the decision not to sign the treaty is a passive decision in the sense of it was never voted on in Congress. It's just never brought up. In the U.S. system, the government signs a treaty only when 2/3 of the Senate members vote for it. So and the U.S. doesn't sign many treaties, and the U.S. government doesn't. And one of the reasons the U.S. government doesn't sign many treaties, the U.S. government didn't sign the treaty, refused to sign the treaty banning landmines, for instance. The U.S. government refused to sign the international treaty called the Protocol on Children's Rights, the U.S. government. And one of the ways in which the U.S. political operators do that is they never bring it up to the Senate at all.
So it's just swept under the rug.
Yeah, but that's not true of other countries.
Right.
So the treaty to ban nuclear weapons has been signed by dozens of other countries.
And that's due to the work of ICAN.
Yes, and ICAN, what is so important to me about ICAN is that they didn't come at it from the point of view, as you were so well describing, of the fiction, of the myth of deterrence. They came at it as a humanitarian question. And so they started with, well, whose health is jeopardized by even developing nuclear weapons? To develop nuclear weapons, you have to test them, and you have to find uranium. So you start with, well, which women in the world are harmed by nuclear testing now. And that's why indigenous women in Australia were in the lead of the campaign called ICAN. Now, when you start an international campaign with the knowledge of, and the both knowledge and experience, because you have to acknowledge that indigenous women in Australia, they don't just have the experience of health being jeopardized by nuclear testing, they have the knowledge. That's a very different acknowledgement.
Right. Absolutely.
And when you put their knowledge and their experience at the core of an international campaign, you have a very different campaign. So there have been anti-nuclear campaigns before, but they usually put at the forefront the knowledge, allegedly, of experts.
Right.
And that oftentimes in the areas of nuclear power and weapons engineering, that oftentimes is a highly masculinized leadership, even if it's a leadership for a cause you believe in, which is against nuclear weapons, where you start as nuclear weapons and the development of them and the testing of them and the storing of them, all those processes, you think, well, who's most immediately knowledgeable about the testing, about the mining? You have a very different kind of notion of expertise and a very different notion of who should lead the campaign. So ICAN, ICAN, all in caps.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned them. When did they start their work? What year was that?
Oh gosh, the best book on this, and it's a book that's very easily available, and it's really meant to be widely read. It's not a academic book, though it can be read by academics. It's a very serious, thoughtful, but it's full of stories as well, and it's a book called Banning the Bomb, Smashing the Patriarchy. Banning the Bomb.
This is by Ray.
This is by Ray Acheson.
Yeah. Okay. And
it's a commercial book. It's easily available. What's wonderful about Ray's book, she works for the organization called WILPF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which I'm a member of. And so it's usually referred to as WILPF, but WLRN. And she works at the UN, not inside the UN. She's not a member of the UN, but she works lobbying the UN. And she has written the best book about, well, where were indigenous women in this? Why were they in the lead? Why were Fijian women in the lead? Why were other Pacific Islands? Because that's where the bomb was tested. So if you want to know about who is being jeopardized, endangered, treated as they don't matter, watch South Pacific women. Watch Fiji.
Yes. And that, I just want to say that's not to diminish the pain and suffering and the terror that I think many of us, if you look at this issue and realize the capacity of these weapons and that they've already been used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's like we know that there is a certain percentage of our population generally globally that hopefully won't push that button, but they could. It's a very horrifying thought. And so I don't want to diminish the terror that Americans feel, even though we don't have that experience that you're talking about of being direct victims. Or, we had the 3 Mile Island nuclear.
We had testing, Thistle.
And we had testing.
We had above ground testing. And who suffered from that?
Right. Here in this country, who suffered from that? Exactly.
The women who have least power in the American political system, which is indigenous women.
I'm glad we connected those dots.
And where were French nuclear weapons tested? They were tested in the French colony of the South Pacific.
Right. Wow.
And where were Russian nuclear weapons tested? They were tested in the indigenous areas of the Soviet Union. It's not happenstance. That is which in every country, and this is how racism works, in every country, there is a tendency for the general public in that country to think that some people in their wider country's community don't matter. And if you have if there are any people, this for all our listeners, and me too, God knows, if there's any inclination to think, oh, they don't matter, or I don't have to be interested in them. Oh, I like their rituals, but I don't see them as experts. If there are any people, usually in racial or ethnic groups, but always regional when it comes to nuclear testing, then we are complicit.
Yeah, or if they're erased, if we don't remember, we don't acknowledge, think
it's a very active thing to do.
And that's built into our United States society,
we resist. Indigenous people in the U.S. as well as in Canada,
right? And hallelujah for that indigenous resistance. And obviously ICAN is a very inspirational example of that. And that leads me to wrapping up the interview and talking about what gives you hope for now, starting in August of 2025, when we know this threat is so big. What gives you hope, Cynthia?
Japanese feminists, indigenous feminists, and ICAN, because the extent to which we take hope from them and learn from them is the extent to which we will not feel overwhelmed or pushed aside.
Or that desperation. Cynthia, I'm talking about that desperation when I talk about my own experience in the 1980s, and then even with this 80th anniversary and the psychological terror of the threat, and how all of us live under that psychological terror and threat of nuclear holocaust, and it's almost unbearable to just to think about these things.
But it's the people who want.
I'm not saying that burying our heads in the sand is the solution. It's definitely not. But I just want to say, though, how difficult it is, and how can you find hope? How can we have hope? How can we see a way out of this,
is to not be paralyzed by terror and not to be made passive by technical questions. That's the other way in which we're pushed aside or silenced. And I think the people who developed ICAN, which has been very successful, they came at it from humanitarian perspectives, which means you don't have to be a physicist, you don't have to be an engineer, and you don't have to be a highly technical policy person. You can just be a person who thinks about health. You could be a person who thinks about the quality of soil. If you can think about those things, then you will not be paralyzed by your terror.
Oh, and we'll leave it on that note. And thank you so much, Cynthia. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm just so thankful that you will come on to WLRN's airwaves and share your wisdom and your knowledge with us. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Thistle.
Since 2016,
empowering women to be the media
and reclaim the narrative.
Your grassroots community radio station.
By women, for women.
WLRN.
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 Men in their rancor and carelessness will convert the world into a crematorium for their failed civilization. We have every reason to fear this. The Federation of American Scientists estimates that the global nuclear weapons inventory comprises slightly over 12,000 warheads. Almost 4,000 of these are deployed and on alert for launch in a matter of minutes from subterranean missile silos, bomber planes, and nuclear-powered submarines prowling the seas on constant patrol just waiting. 9 nations are known to possess nuclear weapons: Russia, the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea, and all of them are currently undertaking large-scale weapons modernization programs. The United States' own ambitious plan to overhaul its nuclear arsenal, initiated in 2010, is projected to cost up to $1.5 trillion across its 30-year timeline. The average explosive yield of a nuclear weapon in the U.S. horde is 200 kilotons, 10 times more powerful than the Little Boy and Fat Man bombs our government dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The largest warhead in the arsenal has a 1.2 megaton yield, 80 times more powerful than the bombs our government dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leveling these Japanese cities into instant wastelands, killing hundreds of thousands of people, and who knows how many other animals and plants, just to prove it could be done. In January of this year, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists set its doomsday clock at 89 seconds to midnight. the nearest to cataclysm we've ever been. Their 2025 Doomsday Clock statement cites, quote, the modernization and expansion of arsenals in all nuclear weapons countries, the buildup of new capabilities, the risk of inadvertent or deliberate nuclear use, the loss of arms control agreements, and the possibility of nuclear proliferation to new countries as causes for anticipating imminent disaster. As long as the U.S.-sponsored proxy war against Russia and Ukraine remains ongoing, quote, the conflict could become nuclear at any moment because of a rash decision or through accident or miscalculation. In August, President Donald Trump and Dmitry Medvedev, a former Russian president now serving as deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, traded nuclear taunts during a bout of social media sparring. Trump then upped the ante by ordering 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned nearer to Russia. The Russians declined the bait. President Putin's press secretary has asserted that his government prefers to maintain, quote, a responsible stance on nuclear issues. As per the Cold War playbook, the U.S. is poking the bear while relying upon the discretion of those we condemn as madmen to avert apocalypse. The authors of the Doomsday Clock statement also warn that Israel's genocide in Gaza, yet another U.S.-funded military project, could go nuclear if it continues to inflame the region towards wider war. They note that China's nuclear arsenal now totals 600 warheads, and while North Korea's Kim Jong-un has only 50, he is pledged to exponentially expand his stock. As for the United States, they write that this country, quote, can no longer be counted on as a voice of caution or nuclear moderation. The U.S. Department of Defense's latest Nuclear Posture Review fact sheet, published in 2022, informs us that nuclear weapons undergird all our national defense priorities, and that the deterrence effects of nuclear weapons are so uniquely effective that they cannot be replaced by any other, quote, elements of U.S. military power. Accordingly, to rely on nuclear weapons to deflect attack, as well as to, quote, achieve presidential objectives if deterrence fails, is a, quote, sensible and stabilizing approach to national security. The posture promises admirable self-restraint. Quote, the U.S. would only consider the use of nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances to defend the vital interests of the United States or its allies and partners. What these vital interests include is not specified, but we have little reason to believe that the vitality of the biosphere ranks high among them. Women, confronting the patriarchal race to nuclear annihilation, tend first to observe 2 glaringly obvious truths. 1, that these weapons are man-made, and 2, that they look like dicks. Patricia Ellsberg and Alyssa Melamed put it neatly in their contribution to the feminist anti-nuclear anthology Exposing Nuclear Fallacies, published in 1989. Quote, nuclear weapons are products of the male mind, being 100% conceived, developed, administered, and utilized by men. Like most other weapons, they resemble male sexual anatomy, in this case to an uncanny and ludicrous degree. End quote. The male mind has long embraced weapons of all sorts as self-evident and highly gratifying phallic symbols. Nuclear missiles are a proud addition to the arsenal, conceived and developed, administered and utilized by men for whom the phallus stands tall in testament to the power, superiority, dominance, and authority vested in the male as his birthright. The missile equals penis identification has been established with a remarkable lack of subtlety throughout patriarchal popular culture, and has shaped both the imagery and rhetoric of those more specialized fraternal institutions where nuclear scientists and strategists go about their work. In Missile Envy, The Arms Race and Nuclear War, published in 1986, Helen Caldicott describes watching a film of an MX missile launch. Quote, it rose slowly from the ground, surrounded by smoke and flames, and elongated into the air. It was a very sexual sight indeed, more so when armed with the 10 warheads it will explode with the most almighty orgasm. End quote. In this iconography of martial manhood, intercourse is bound up with apocalypse such that a 1.2 megaton robust nuclear Earth penetrator is a wet dream and, as Jane Caputi writes, nuclear holocaust comes to be celebrated as ultimate orgasm, ultimate snuff scene. Diana H. Russell, in Exposing Nuclear Fallacies, references a 1986 psychology study which found that male students who endorsed the use of nuclear weapons were more likely to report arousal at the thought of, quote, forcing a female to do something she didn't want to do. The nuclear warlords is a rapist virility, validated by violation. Reduced to its most basic social function, war is a manhood contest. Since the beginning of patriarchal history, war has been the paradigmatic male initiation rite. It is masculinity's proving ground, upon which boys compete to become men, and men compete amongst themselves for valor and hero status. War is a spectator sport and a national pastime, since just as men must prove their individual manhood, nations are required to prove their collective manhood on the playing field of global patriarchy. Virginia Woolf came to the same conclusion 90 years ago in 3 Guineas, published in 1938, writing that war seemed to be for men, quote, a source of happiness and excitement, and also an outlet for manly qualities without which men would deteriorate. End quote. The weapons have changed in the near century sense, but the men in power have not, or not much. Without that multi-ton megaphallus cocked to slice the air at measureless speed, delivering mega-death with maximum penetrative force, they still believe they would be unmanned. The trouble with nuclear weapons, though, is that, at least by the theory of deterrence, they exist to preclude their own use. And nuclear war is never supposed to be fought, and even were the war to start, there would be no real fighting, just the tapping out of codes on some control panel. So the manhood contest is demoted to one of measurement. Who has the bigger bomb? Whose is the deadlier payload? Whose missiles go further, faster, strike harder? It is chilling to consider that the conflict which threatens all living creatures with planetary obliteration could come down to something so consummately juvenile as the dick-waving of stymied wannabe warlords itching for the masculine thrill of a proper throwdown. But this absurdity would seem to be precisely our present situation. Ours is a dangerous, virulently stupid age. And yet we are, for the most part, sleepwalking our way through it, or falling in line to cheer on men's wars. Nuclear risk is as high as it has ever been, but the anti-nuclear resistance is at so low an ebb it barely registers a pulse, as shrunken and enfeebled as the peace movement that once gave it life. Once, women, feminists, were the vanguard of that resistance we are not now. Now, I am often gloomy with the sense that I get that my sisters have learned to stop worrying and fallen in love with men's bombs. I see feminist support for the genocide in Gaza and for Ukraine's war with Russia that the U.S. has kept dragging miserably along, and I wonder gloomily how so many women who say they oppose men's violence and male power could be re-domesticated into home front cheerleaders for the warmongers of global male dominion. Once, in 1980, and again in 1981, 3,000 women traveled from across the country for the Women's Pentagon Action to mourn and rage and defy the nerve center of imperial male warcraft in Washington, D.C., to protest the nuclear arms race. The women encircled the Pentagon with their bodies. With yarn and string, the women wove shut its doors. Once, in August 1981, women set up camp around the Greenham Common Air Force Base in Berkshire, England, to demonstrate their committed opposition to NATO's decision to install U.S. nuclear-armed cruise missiles at the base. Once, in December 1982, 30,000 women gathered at the camp, joining hands to form a circle around the base's 9-mile perimeter in an action that was dubbed Embrace the Base. On New Year's Day, 1983, a far smaller group of women, 40 or so, climbed the fence to infiltrate the base and dance atop the missile silos. When women at the Greenham Common camp were arrested, they defended themselves by charging their government with genocide. Once, staged as a sister action in solidarity with the women at Greenham Common, the Seneca Women's Encampment for a Future of Peace and Justice was opened for a summer of action in 1983, and it drew over 10,000 women to the small upstate New York town of Romulus, which bordered the Seneca Army Depot, where the nuclear missiles slotted for shipment to Greenham were stored prior to transport. Explicitly feminist and women-only from its inception, with a vibrant lesbian contingent, the camp articulated a holistic ecofeminist analysis that made clear the inextricability of everyday male violence against women, men's wars, global impoverishment, racism, colonialism, and ecocide. Throughout the summer, the women led daily marches to the Army Depot gates. They distributed leaflets and canvassed in neighboring towns, despite the rancor they faced from some locals. The women hosted community meetings and teach-ins. They coordinated ceremonies in mourning for the nuclear massacres at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All of these actions are possible. We know it's true because once they happened. There is nothing that our foresisters did then that we do not have the power to do now. But what the women of the feminist anti-nuclear movement also understood was that even more than mass demonstrations and defiant public acts of civil disobedience, what would be required if they truly sought to disarm the man-made system that threatened the world with nuclear extinction was non-compliance, total non-collaboration, a mass withdrawal of energies, cooperation, and support. They recognized that the war machine churning out nuclear weapons and men eager to show them off was the same system that terrorized women with rape, torture, degradation, that deprived women of dignity and self-worth to enforce female subordination to male rule. They saw that the origin of both nuclear war and the endlessly violent everyday oppression of women lay in male dominion, and so it was male dominion from which they would have to revoke their support if there was ever to be peace on Earth. Females are socialized from earliest girlhood to serve the man-made system as support staff, propping up male rule through our daily labors of submission and deference. We are born collaborators, rendered such for the simple reason that male dominance depends on female compliance. Therefore, everything we can do to undermine men's power over women by denying men's power over each one of us every day in our own lives is vital work towards stopping men from destroying the world. And everything that we can do to reject male supremacy, to tear down male dominion by starving it of our submission, is critical to the creation of a peaceful human society, one deserving of its place on Earth. It has been the rule of men, and this man-made culture, patriarchal ideology and its institutions, that have careened us to the razor's edge of destruction we now reel upon. Patriarchy is the end of the world. Nuclear war is male violence. Men in power will kill us if we let them. But male dominion cannot survive without women's collaboration, cooperation, compliance, submission, surrender. And as long as male dominion remains intact, the eventual nuclear annihilation of the Earth remains all but inevitable, so this system does not deserve to survive. For peace, for a future of life on Earth, for love of the living world, we will not comply a moment longer.
That was Aurora Linnea, WLRN member since 2021 and all-around amazing thinker. Finally, we'll hear a song by Thistle called Jezebel. She wrote and recorded the song 24 years ago, shortly before she took off on her bicycle to become a feral creature in an attempt to shed her domesticated human status. In the song, she explores how women have both resisted and birthed our nuclear age by simultaneously living under male dominion and fighting against it. Women sometimes catch a glimpse of peace and freedom, but almost always in relation to male dominion and women's desire for men to change. At the end of the song, the narrator warns that none of us, no matter how powerful, no matter how small, can escape the threats that patriarchy poses, and none of us will be left alone. This implies that women should band together and use our knowledge and history of resistance, plus our current knowledge of what the future holds, to end male dominion once and for all. Like Aurora says in her commentary, we are born collaborators, rendered such for the simple reason that male dominance depends on female compliance. Therein lies its weakness, sisters. If we don't comply, male power diminishes and female power can rise. In the song, the regenerative spring, dances of women continue and the narrator croons, "What will they bring?" Meaning that the future is still yet to happen, so what kind of dance will you do to contribute to better odds? To contribute to a world without nuclear weapons? Something to think about and discuss with your sisters after listening to this month's edition. Thanks for staying tuned to Feminist Community Powered Radio, WLRN. Now here's the song, Jezebel, by Thistle in its entirety. Take a listen.
Spring dances, said my mama as she made my dress. Flowered patterns on pleated cotton, my hair a mess. Sing mama, I will sing daughter. Spring dances, sang my mama, what will they bring? What will they bring? Told us not so long ago the birds won't sing. Then she's gunned down by a bulldozer, Israel's lions ring. Sing mama, I am singing daughter. Spring dances, sang my mama, what will they bring? What will they bring? But my whole life I fought them to be free. Maybe someday the men and boys will see you. Jezebel, Jezebel, Jezebel. Jezebel, Jezebel, Jezebel.
Rachel kept her mother's snake and wrote lots of letters home. So while it's still day, don't make the mistake of thinking you will be left alone. Sing, mama, I am singing, daughter. Spring dances, sings our mama. What will they bring? What will they bring?
Thanks for listening to WLRN's 113th edition podcast on nuclear proliferation and the peace movement. WLRN would like to thank our guest this month for sharing her views on where we are at as we mark the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for speaking with us. And thanks to WLRN member Aurora Linnea for her commentary. Until next time, this is Thistle signing off on another WLRN podcast.
If you like what you are hearing and would like to donate to the cause of feminist community radio, please visit our website and click on the donate button. Check out our merch tab to get a nice gift in exchange for your donation. And if you are interested in joining our team, we are always looking for new volunteers to conduct interviews, write blog posts, post to our Facebook and other social media pages, and do other tasks to keep us moving forward as a collective of media activist women. Thanks for listening. This is Frida, signing off for now.
And I'm Lola. Thanks for tuning in. Next month, we will focus our program on men and women's chants. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out on the first Thursday of the month, so look for it on Thursday, October 2nd. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when each podcast, music show, and interviews are released, please sign up for our newsletter on the WLRN WordPress site. Stay strong in the struggle, and thanks for listening.
This is Margaret. To create the image for edition 113, The Nuclear Threat, I used a photo of the Fat Man, the 21 kiloton implosion-type plutonium bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, along with an image of a woman with atomic bomb injuries, an image of Nagasaki after the explosion, and an atomic bomb plume. I added red colors to the Nagasaki image and magenta to the bomb plume. We see the woman from the back, overlaid with blues and purples, and with the ruins of Nagasaki bleeding through her body. She is facing the destruction, the effects, but we can't see her expression. The Batman bomb sits nestled next to the woman, taking up space, like the space the nuclear war threat occupies in our society and our sensibilities. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support.
This is Anne, signing off on another edition of WLRN's monthly handcrafted podcast. You can find us on X, Facebook, Instagram, Spinster, and SoundCloud, in addition to our website. Our podcast is always crafted with tender, loving care and in solidarity with women worldwide. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you, so please share, like, and comment widely.
But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that,